This is to the audience, is that correct? Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Just want to let you know the show will begin in just about 10 minutes. So thanks for being with us here this evening. Hello, everybody. My name is Brandon Adams. Welcome into this very special edition of the AJC Community Conversation, taking a look at the impact of the coronavirus on the world of sports. It's great to have you with us here tonight. We've got a very distinguished panel. I'll look forward to introducing all of them to all of you over the course of the next couple of minutes. I also want to take a moment to say thank you to all of you for tuning in tonight on either the AJC Facebook or YouTube page, and for those of you who've submitted questions already for our conversation here this evening. Many of you may hear your topic addressed on the broadcast. And of course, if you're watching live, there's still time for you to get your question asked as well. Simply drop your question or comment in the Facebook or YouTube comment sections. We'll look forward to reading as many of those as we can during tonight's broadcast. And before we get going, it also seems appropriate to give a special thank you to our friends at Kroger for their partnership in tonight's event. For so many of us, Kroger's been an invaluable resource as we've all dealt with the effects of the coronavirus on ourselves and our families. And Kroger's been there with the household essentials that we need, including the food that we put on the table. So with that in mind, it's great to have Kroger as a part of what we're doing this evening with the AJC Community Conversation there as well. And as I mentioned, it's a terrific panel also of very distinguished names in the world of sports here in the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia. Let me take a moment to introduce all of them right now, and then we'll get into our questions for the evening, starting with Nikki Collin, the head coach of the WNBA's Atlanta Dream. Katie Griggs, vice president for business operations for Atlanta United. Rich Kanaa, the executive director of the Atlanta Track Club. Steve Koonin, Atlanta Hawks CEO. D. Orlando Ledbetter, the Atlanta Falcons beat writer for the AJC. Georgia Athletic Director Greg McGarity, and Georgia Tech Athletic Director Todd Stansberry. We'll look forward to the conversation with all of those ladies and gentlemen here this evening. And of course, tonight's discussion will kind of span a couple of different ideas, both where we've been in the world of sports here in Atlanta and the state of Georgia, and where we might be going from here. Of course, it's appropriate to look back on what's happened over the course of the last month and the last few months, and some of the disappointments that we've all experienced for our favorite sports, favorite teams, favorite events, many of which had to be canceled or postponed because of the coronavirus. And it seems appropriate to start there this evening. With that in mind, Rich Kanaa, I'll bring you in. When you look at the AJC Peachtree Road Race, an event that has been really a centerpiece part of a lot of folks' 4th of July for a long time. This year, the in-person running of the AJC Peachtree Road Race had to be canceled. I'm curious from you, what was it like both deliberating on that decision and then ultimately having to make that announcement to the people of Atlanta, knowing that obviously folks were going to be disappointed by that outcome?
Well, I'll start by saying thanks for having me on this evening and allowing me to start, much like the AJC Peachtree Road Race starts our 4th of July every year. I guess I can say just this, that the challenges were significant, but very different from the challenges of my fellow guests on tonight. Our field of play is 6.2 miles of roadway here in the city of Atlanta. And we, in our preparations, have extensive tabletop exercises, and we go through just about anything that you could expect, from a fire on the course to a cardiac arrest to a drought to some police action. Even a few years ago dealt with a lightning strike. But there was nothing in our operations manual that planned for a pandemic.
Go ahead, Rich.
I was going to say, when we postponed, we had every intention of having it on Thanksgiving Day, but obviously when July rolled around, we realized that was not possible. So we're a health and wellness organization. We recognized that needed to be front and center.
No doubt about that. Todd Stansberry for Georgia Tech and the ACC. There was good news, but the fact that college football is going to be able to take place this season. The Yellow Jackets have already played twice, but there was obviously a cancellation involved with your program as well. The long-standing rivalry with Georgia that's been played every season, dating back to the mid-1920s. That game not going to be able to be played this year. As the ACC and your institution in particular dealt with that, what was it like, wrestling with the idea of finding a way to preserve that rivalry, or at least attempting to, in a year in which conference-only games kind of dominated most of the slate?
Yeah, I think that obviously went into our decision to we're in a unique situation in the ACC and the SEC in which we have a number of schools whose in state rivalries are in another conference. So one of the things that us, Louisville, Clemson, Florida State, were all looking at was how do we preserve that in-state rivalry. Obviously, when it turned out that we weren't going to be able to play that game, I think all of us have used the word unprecedented in to describe our current situation. I think it just highlights the fact that we are in unprecedented times, and quite frankly, as a former player at Georgia Tech, I didn't even know that was even an option not to play Georgia. So we are definitely in unprecedented times.
And Greg, I know from the perspective of the SEC, as Todd mentioned, you also had some kind of partners in this discussion as well, because much the same way Georgia wants to play Georgia Tech, South Carolina wanted to play Clemson, Kentucky wanted to play Louisville, Florida wanted to play Florida State. In the SEC East alone, there are a lot of those cross rivalries with the ACC, and I'm sure the discussion with those schools was much the same way. And is there some way to preserve this, some way to keep this game if we are going to be playing football this year? We may be dealing with an audio issue with Greg there. We'll see if we can get that cleared away. No worries, Greg. Go ahead.
Brandon, that's my fault.
No worries.
I've been enough of these Zooms, I ought to know how to operate the stuff, okay? But no, Todd and I, we had a lot of discussion beforehand about how important that game was. And if we were going to play one game, let's make sure it's our game. But as we developed in our meetings, we've just found out that was really not going to happen in the SEC because 10 other schools don't have the rivalries that 4 of us do. So the numbers just didn't work out. And from a testing standpoint, consistency in our conference kind of ruled the day. And it's unfortunate, but we'll pick it back up in 2021 and have another great game.
No question about that. And Katie Griggs for Atlanta United, the MLS, it seems like your league, your sport has been as unique as any of these in terms of how it's adapted and how it's changed. It's a shorter regular season. There was a brief tournament on when the MLS was returning. How have you kind of, I guess, dealt with what is kind of a very weird looking year for the MLS, but fun for the fans who enjoy that brand of soccer as well? What's that experience been like for you?
I think weird looking is definitely a good way to describe it. It's interesting. We were all down in Mexico City on March 11th when the first NBA positive test came. And by the time we landed back in Atlanta the following morning, our season was indefinitely postponed. So it really has been a matter of helping our athletes and our staff, first and foremost, stay healthy, but also adapting to an entirely new world. So to your point, when we were able to finally get everyone coming back, it was under fairly aggressive, not even fairly aggressive, quite aggressive protocol aimed at ensuring the health of everyone. And in an effort to get the league up playing as quickly as possible, that's why the bubble in Orlando made as much sense as it did. And we were very fortunate that our experience and the experience of the NBA really did prove out that concept can work well. So we're thrilled to be back in Atlanta. We're thrilled to be playing in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. But yeah, it's definitely been a unique situation, and one that in full transparency has demonstrated the protocols work, but they definitely come with challenges.
Well, speaking of the NBA, I want to bring in Steve Koonin on this, the Atlanta Hawks CEO. And Steve, I remember when it first became obvious that the NBA was going to be shutting down, there was this huge social media reaction that kind of moved slowly with a lot of Atlanta Hawks fans realizing that, wait a second, we may have just seen Vince Carter play his last game. Of people of a certain age like myself, Carter was obviously a huge figure over the course of his career, and he'd been a beloved member of the Atlanta Hawks, and we knew this was his last season. We assumed that final game would come much later than it actually turned out to. I know as an organization, I'm sure you had a lot of things planned, and Carter's final game being missed, not the only thing that you guys miss out on by not concluding your season, but that also had to be, I would imagine, an issue for all of you as well of, wow, this is just a perfect example of some things that we were looking forward to and some things we were anticipating just weren't going to be able to take place this year. I think Steve may be muted. We'll see if we can get him off mute. And this is the same experience that everyone's having in their workplace every day. So if we're going to do a community conversation about the impact of the coronavirus, this is as authentic as it gets because we're all dealing with stuff like that. Steve, isn't that right? So I'm still not hearing Steve. I think that may be something we'll check on. Yeah. We'll check on Steve and we'll come back on that in just a minute. Let me move on to Nikki Collin here as the WNBA coach of the Atlanta Dream. The WNBA was able to have its draft, was able to go through with that. But I'm imagining if you want to go back to the spring when all this is going on, the pre-draft process for all of this had to be made way different by all of this. I would imagine that your scouting, your organization scouting had to be changed tremendously by not being able to do that, right?
Yeah, unfortunately for us, I was at the SEC tournament 3 days before really everything got shut down. And we ended up choosing Kennedy Carter, who was at the SEC tournament, so had a chance to see her live. But certainly disappointed the NCAA tournament and the other conference tournaments that we did miss out on. Unfortunate, because those are moments that you see players make big plays and big moments. And, that's what you want when you're taking it to the next level and the next stage. Now, for us, certainly there's a lot of film work. There's a lot of talking to coaches and trainers and people like that to make sure that we're drafting the right players, personality-wise, culture-wise, injury-wise. But I think there's no doubt we missed opportunity to see players play in big moments, especially because of the lost NCAA tournament.
The evaluation that you do in a 5-on-5 situation just way different than any kind of drill work or anything like that, of course.
For sure. And just seeing them in a game of the magnitude of a one and done situation, I think that's what we lost as much as anything. Players having the opportunity to play on those big stages and have those big moments.
Steve, let's try you again with the audio situation. I know you wanted to talk about Vince Carter a little bit. Let me bring you back into this conversation. Yeah, so I'm still not hearing Steve. We'll see if we can get that taken care of, and we'll get back in on that in a moment. Of course, it's great to have him and all of you with us here tonight. And as Nikki was discussing in terms of the adaptation that has to go on because of all of this, each of the organizations and the leaders that we're speaking to tonight were all a part of those moments of having to get used to a sporting life here in 2020 that's just going to look different than we've come to expect. The same thing is true for the NFL as well, where Orlando Ledbetter covers the Atlanta Falcons for the AJC. And after a couple of weeks here, D-Led, you've had a little bit of experience covering the NFL during all of this time. What has it been like for you following the league, keeping up with the Falcons, delivering Falcons news to Falcons fans in a time in which the media experience, I'm assuming, has really been different? What's that been like for you?
Well, it's been a big adjustment. We normally have a run of the locker room. We can get to any player that we want to, plus the two that they make available. So we don't have that type of access anymore. So it takes a little bit more creativity to plan out your coverage now. But understanding that we're going through a pandemic and so forth, and the team is trying their best to, make sure that they get the, information to their fans through us. So, it's been a bumpy start to the season, but, we'll work things out and make sure that the fans get as much information as we can with the access that's being allowed.
And Nikki, speaking of bumpy starts, I know when the Dream was first heading towards the bubble, you guys had a couple of positive tests, and I'm imagining that must have been a frustrating experience both because we're just learning about all of this. It's hard to know how that process is going to go, including understanding the testing process. And aside from that, you're trying to coach your team, you're trying to win games and, grow your players playing together. I'm imagining that experience is also a little bit of a bumpy start for you guys as well.
Yeah, I think nobody knows enough about COVID, and we're learning stuff every day. I think for us, we were the WNBA's guinea pig. In a lot of ways in terms of medical protocol and dealing with players with COVID in the bubble. We had one player test positive before we got there, so she didn't travel with us. And then two test positive kind of during that 4-day quarantine period when we first got there. So we really were the only true positive tests in that WNBA bubble. And I think the thing that was most frustrating, a team that had 2 opt-outs to begin, a team with 10 players new of the 12 that we took there, and then not having key players for training camp, which was shortened anyway, was a difficult task. But above and beyond that, I can tell you that the emotional toll that it took on our organization as we dealt with how long we were going to have to wait to get them back and the procedures of getting 2 negatives in a row, that was not an easy thing. We finally got our first negative and got excited to get 2 in a row. And, we had a situation where we turned a negative, then an indeterminate, then a positive, then a negative, then a positive. And that process stretched out for up to 10 days per player, just trying to get them back until the NBA instituted kind of the antigen combined with the antibodies test to kind of confirm that since they were symptom free, that we weren't going to have to worry about positive tests from that point on with those 3 players. But definitely we felt like guinea pigs, very emotional, very difficult to kind of manage both sides of that, and having a depleted roster, trying to have a training camp with 9 players.
Katie, Atlanta United also dealt with some positive tests a little early. What would you say your organization learned through that process?
I mean, Nikki nailed it. It's definitely, I think there's so little that people knew at that point, and our knowledge is still growing. For us, I think to the extent there was a silver lining, they were both identified prior to going into the bubble. They were immediately taken to the side. They tested all of the protocols that we had put in place. And for us, it provided a lot of validation that what we were doing really did work. So we were able to get both the players tested again to confirm that they were real positives, get them quarantined, make sure that their medical health was paramount, keep the rest of the team to the side. And we're ultimately able to get them back and get the team down to Florida safely. But it really was a validation of all of the things and all of the work that the players and the staff are doing, and taking the protocols, whether it's masks, hand sanitizer, temperature checks, and the like, very, very seriously. So it was helpful for us in validating that.
Steve Coonan, I want to bring you back into the discussion. When you look at our college athletic directors, when you think of college football at least, they knew they had several months to get ready for their season. Yet when we all first started confronting the pandemic, the NBA was in the midst of its season. How challenging was that, having to make these huge decisions and adapt to all of this really quickly, as the season was going on? I imagine the communication during all of that must have been quite intense.
It has been quite intense. Hopefully you can hear me now, and I apologize.
I can.
I apologize. I had to re-log in. We had some technical difficulties, so my apologies.
No problem.
The truth of the matter is we're still playing the 2019-20 season, which started October 24th and will probably end in October, almost a full year for a season. I do not know when we're going to start. Adam Silver said the other day that he's thinking more January. And so I think the thing that probably everyone on the screen has learned is incredible flexibility. And, if you make a plan, you're going to be wrong, but you have to put a stake in the ground and do the best you can figuring it out. Our players are now sequestered. We have taken over a hotel in Midtown. They're sequestered. We've built our own bubble. We're the only people in the hotel. They get on a bus. They go over to our Emory Sports Complex and scrimmage for the first time in 6.5 months and come back to the hotel where they're sequestered. So everything is taken with health and safety first, but the amount of rigor that goes around it is unlike anything I've ever seen.
Well, Todd, Steve mentions flexibility there. The ACC certainly understands that, whether it be adding Notre Dame as a full-fledged playing member this year, also playing a non-conference game, something that the SEC is not doing, something that the Big Ten's not going to do in their shortened schedule. You guys in the ACC certainly dealt with that flexibility. What has that been like, both in terms of just I guess, wrapping your mind around the fact that in the ACC this year, the league schedule is just going to look so different? I think, Todd, we may have...
It's not just me.
Yeah.
You made Steve a very happy man,
Steve,
Todd.
I'm trying to make you feel better. But like Steve said, flexible, you got to be nimble. I mean, this goes against everything that we're typically used to, in that in sport, when your games are scheduled, when preseason starts, our kids are conditioned to know exactly what their whole day, week, year looks like. We're typically scheduling games 4, 5, 6 years in advance. I've got games already scheduled for 30 and 31. And now I got a call the other day wondering if we could potentially play a game on our bye week because of the situation with Notre Dame. So nimble and flexible and patient, and everything's on the table. And that's kind of how we realize that that's what this year is going to look like, and hopefully, and it's definitely a week to week, day by day, test by test situation.
Greg, I mentioned with the ACC about the different approach they're taking, and if you look across the Power Five, the Big Ten has announced it's returning to football. We may hear a similar announcement from the Pac-12 coming eventually. I know they're contemplating a couple of scenarios here. The Big 12 is obviously playing, and the SEC, you guys are playing. As a leader in the SEC, why do you think it is that the various conferences arrived at such different conclusions about whether or not they could play and how soon they could play?
Brandon, I think it really boiled down to medical advice. There may be second opinions. It may be the group you're listening to. There's so many different specific areas that physicians specialize in. So it might have been the group you're listening to, the advice they offered. I think politics might have got involved a little bit, especially in the Big Ten. But I do think that so much, the athletic directors really don't know much about COVID. I mean, we know a thimbleful. So we all depend on our trainers, our medical staff, and the SEC devised this medical advisory task force to really guide us, advise us. And so we really followed that advice, but I'm sure Todd's been in the same boat as well as the Big Ten and the Pac-12. And, they all hear different things. And I think it's just up to the membership. It's up to eventually the presidents in our conference to decide whether to play or not. But we felt comfortable in our move, and others might not have felt that comfortable.
Rich, we talked to you a little earlier about the AJC Peachtree Road Race, the in-person event canceled. This year, the virtual event. I know folks like keeping that connection, even in a year when things are a little strange. Give us an idea of what the virtual running of that event would look like, because your organization has dealt with just as much change as the other sports leagues we've talked about so far tonight.
We have, and I would agree that the key word is flexibility. Remind everybody once again, our player, we don't have a 15-person roster or a 53-person roster. Our roster for the Peachtree is 60,000 people. So we don't have the ability to test all of those. So we came to the conclusion that the only way to deliver Peachtree was through a virtual experience. And our guiding principles there were make sure that it is authentic, meaning the Peachtree brings all of Atlanta together. So find a way to bring them together virtually with a shared experience. Keep the tradition alive. And that's all about delivering that coveted finishers T-shirt to everyone. So we're going to send out hopefully 60,000 UPS packages to everyone's front door. And then the last, of course, is experience. Through the use of technology in our app and GPS, follow people's progress, allow them to share their progress while they see and hear the sights and sounds of Peachtree from the 4th of July.
You mentioned the T-shirt, no joke. That is one of the most beloved trophies in our city. People love wearing those with pride. You go to 4th of July fireworks displays, you see a lot of folks wearing those, and people collect them from year to year. I know in thinking of the virtual event, questions about the T-shirt had to be about as prominent a discussion as you probably had, right?
Yes, I can say I probably had close to 60,000 conversations on that T-shirt.
No question about that. For those of you tuning in tonight, let me remind you who we are and what we're doing. First of all, it's great to have you as part of our AJC Community Conversation, looking at the impact of coronavirus in the world of sports. We've got a great panel of leaders around the state of Georgia, the city of Atlanta. We're focusing in on how things have gone over the last few months and where things may go in the year to come as sports continues to confront this deadly pandemic. We will keep that conversation going and invite you to be a part of it with your comments and questions, both on Facebook and YouTube. We'll look forward to interacting with you on those throughout the evening. A word that has been used a lot in sports lately, and as some of our panelists even tonight have already said, a seeming effective weapon against the coronavirus, at least within the realm of sports, has been the idea of a bubble. It has worked well, it would seem, in the NBA, WNBA, MLS in the early stages. The concept of a bubble has worked well there. Other sports, for various reasons, that's not the kind of thing they're able to as easily employ, or maybe in some of the professional ranks, they just simply chose not to. Steve Koonin, obviously the NBA, when you first heard about this, of course, the Hawks didn't go to Orlando for the bubble, but as a organizational leader there, I know you were part of these conversations. It seems like at the beginning there was some pushback on this. Maybe, some players not sure if they wanted to sequester themselves in a bubble. Would they be comfortable? Would it work? Do you remember when you first started hearing conversations about this, and maybe how hard it was in terms of a league-wide situation to convince people that the bubble in Orlando did have a chance to work?
I am on a bunch of presidents and planning committees, and the first time I had heard it, the idea was Vegas, because if you remember, Las Vegas shut down, and we do summer league in Las Vegas and have a very good network of hotels and partnerships and multiple arenas. And then in conversations with Disney through ESPN, who is one of the preeminent partners of the NBA, the idea that Disney's Wild World of Sports could accommodate everything. It's an unbelievably daunting effort, and it was $180 million to build this campus. We like using the word campus because people don't want to be confined to a bubble. But I think the biggest thing that will come out of this, and it's going to affect everybody, is you're seeing the best competition we've seen in a long, long time, because you're not seeing the travel, you're not seeing the wear and tear, you're not seeing a lot of the different elements that make working for a player to be able to function through a season very, very difficult. And I think we will stop and take lessons from that could affect scheduling, could affect travel, could affect all elements of all of our sports. And so the NBA, I believe, WNBA deserve huge amounts of credit. To date, there hasn't been one positive corona test. So the effort was immense, but the results have been even, I think, greater.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Katie, you mentioned the idea that the MLS had been in a bubble and yet has now kind of returned to something that's a little more traditional. How has United and MLS in particular tried to maintain the same kind of health protocols that you get when you're either, to use the phrase we used before, on campus or in a bubble environment, now that you're not doing that? Is it same day travel for away games? How is MLS keeping players safe now that they're not sequestered in the same environment anymore?
No, it's a great question. So there are, to your point, for away matches, they are same day travel with very, very few exceptions. For anyone who's a fan of MLS, you'll notice that we've been playing much more geographically proximate clubs for the most part since we came out of the bubble. That is very intentional because it does allow for chartered flights. So you're not going in and out of airports. You're going directly from our training facility where everyone has been tested the day before and has to have that negative test before they're allowed to travel. They're getting on a plane only with people who are also being tested. And just to put that into context, we're talking about testing every 48 hours and ensuring that you have a continuity of negative tests. That group of individuals, which is very, very restricted, so even our ability to cover our team, whether it's comms or through social media, has scaled way, way back just to ensure that as few people as possible are coming into contact with our athletes. They're traveling down, they're going to a quarantined area of a hotel where they can relax for a little bit before a match begins, straight to the match, showering and heading straight home on a chartered flight. So those away matches really are incredibly restricted. When they're here in market, similar protocols are in place. I mean, I think it's a major credit to the athletes themselves because clearly they're taking a lot of self-accountability, as are their families, in terms of ensuring that they're being safe when they are in their homes and in this community. But whether we're talking about our training facility or we have had a number of matches now at Mercedes-Benz Stadium without fans where we have several hundred associates, whether they're broadcast, security, housekeeping, et cetera, who are all there. The protocols that are in place to ensure that that can be done safely and that the different groups are being kept separate and everything is being kept clean is really, really rigorous. And so it's something where whether it's on premises, whether it's an away match or whether it's at our stadium, it's really all about accountability, following those protocols. And it's restrictive, but it's restrictive in allowing us to play, which ultimately is our goal.
Nikki, you actually lived in the bubble at IMG Academy. Did you get bored? What was that like? I think all of us are kind of imagining what that experience must have been like. You actually lived through it.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit summer camp, a little bit Groundhog's Day, for those that certainly watched that movie. Because of the compressed nature of our schedule as well, playing every other day, you were either in a game day or an in-between day. And so your schedule basically consisted of shoot around or a walkthrough, a game and COVID testing. So 72 straight days there of COVID testing. You got to know all the nurses. You knew who you wanted to stick things up your nose and which ones you didn't. And so, I mean, it was, in some ways, just like Steve said, I think there was some really good basketball. The offense was really good in the WNBA because you didn't have obviously we're a league that doesn't charter. So commercial airline travel and players on 3-game swings on the West Coast with knees swelling. Like, I think the quality of play was really, really good and continues to be. Obviously, we're in the semifinals right now. But as far as day to day, I feel lucky in some ways that we were at a true campus. I mean, we were able to walk on it. We were able to bike on it. We had golf cart access, some things that at least allowed you to get out and have fresh air and be by the pool. I think the uniqueness of our situation, which may have been a little different than the NBA, is that we were all in one place. So we were with the officials, we were with WNBA team staff, WNBA league staff. I got very, very friendly with all the officials in the WNBA, which I'm hoping bodes well for the future.
Greg, one of our viewers watching, Richard Foldsmith, asked the question. We talk about the MLS, what it's done, WNBA, NBA, college football not able to put its players in a bubble. So what Richard wants to know is, how have schools like University of Georgia kept players, athletes from all sports safe, knowing that the bubble is not something that you've been able to fully employ?
Well, Brandon, that's been the toughest thing, is really educating all of our student athletes on the protocol while they're in our building, really while they're on our campus. There's not a safer place to be because the facilities are clean, the classrooms are clean. So much of it is online now, but the concern was obviously when they went off campus. So I think these young people knew if they didn't adhere to the protocols, then there would be no play. But all these youngsters really have listened very well. They've learned that when you do test positive, it's not a fun experience. When you hang around people that have had it or are active, it's not a very good place to be. So I think the young people have really listened. They've done a good job thus far, and we've just got to get through the spring with hopefully as few positive tests as possible.
Todd, I heard Will Muschamp, the South Carolina coach, the other day say that the job of a coach right now is to convince players to live a boring life, which is kind of a funny way to say that. For your own coaches that you work with, how do you think they've experienced the idea of convincing players to maybe be a little less social? After all, the college experience, the socializing is a huge part of that.
Yeah, I think our student athletes started coming back in the middle of June, and our coaches started educating them way before that on how high the stakes are. And of course, there's no roadmap here. We're making the roadmap as we go. And we really worked at educating them on the fact that if we're going to have any chance of playing whatsoever, we've got to be able to keep you safe. You got to keep yourself safe. And I think a tribute to the student athletes, not only at Georgia Tech, but across the country, who aren't living in a bubble, but are really managing their themselves, their business. And I think at the end of the day, as we've all been on teams, you don't want to let your team down. And it's not so much as just testing positive, but through contact tracing, you could wipe out your whole team with 1 or 2 positives. So I think that plays a role, and I think it also shows how badly these young people actually want to play their games, their sports, and because without them buying in, there's no way we can be doing what we're doing.
Rich, as the executive director of the Atlanta Track Club, you almost saw the exact opposite. Folks wanted to break out of their bubble. March, April, they wanted to get outside. They wanted to run. They were led to believe that was maybe a healthy exercise choice. Did you enjoy seeing all the people that seemed to turn to running at a time when there just wasn't a lot else going on?
Short answer is yes, and I truly believe that a few years down the road, when we look back at 2020, we will recognize that there was a silver lining to COVID-19, and that was getting people off the couch, running and walking, recognizing that one of their best defenses against a disease like this is to be healthy aerobically and cardiovascularly. So I do believe that we're going to see a big running boom as we exit COVID-19, hopefully very soon.
D-Led, the NFL chose not to do a bubble. They're doing something that's fairly close to the traditional season. How do you think the league has handled things, kind of going about its business a little different than some of the other professional sports that are represented tonight? We'll get D-Led's audio cranked up there. There you go. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, the league and the NFLPA did a great job of coming together with a plan that included daily testing. So, if you're coming in the building, you've been tested. The Falcons only had 7 players test positive, go through quarantine and come back. League-wide guys got to opt out if they had a physical situation at home, and a lot of good players not playing this year because of that. So they came up with a plan that involved a lot of testing, but then if they're going to make it through the season, the players are going to have to, when they leave the facilities, they have to put themselves in a bubble. Otherwise, they're going to bring the thing to the team. And, you guys said earlier, you could wipe out a potential room. You could lose your offensive lineman on Friday night. And so the other thing they did that was smart was they expanded the rosters for game day and expanded the practice squad to include players you can protect and veterans. So you can have 4 or 5 veterans on the practice squad that, hey, if something happens on Saturday night, you can activate them before the game on Sunday. So they've got plans to get through the season. We haven't seen a rash or any St. Louis Cardinal or Marlin situations yet, but we're only 2 games into the season. So we'll be keeping a watch on that.
Certainly we'll keep watching that for sure. It's our AJC Community Conversation. One of the hottest topics related to the return of sports is when fans will get a chance to be in the stadium and how many will be allowed to come in when that indeed takes place. We will address all of that coming up momentarily. But before that, let's pause for a quick message from our friends at Kroger.
In 1985, a white man walked into a black church and killed a beloved couple during Bible study.
I heard the shots, 4 shots.
There's a man serving 2 life sentences for the South Georgia murders, but he says he's innocent, and even some of the investigators who worked the case believe him. I wanted to see what the evidence showed about him and about other suspects.
Imperfect Alibi, Tuesday, October 6th on GPB.
So it's certainly a fantastic, fascinating broadcast coming up. I know you're going to want to tune in and see that for yourself. 8 p.m. on October the 6th there on GPB. Terrific work by Joshua Sharp there of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Very, very impactful reporting. And, of course, speaking of the reporting you get in the AJC, tonight what we're doing is part of our AJC Community Conversation. It is a special community service project on the part of here with the folks at the AJC as a thank you to our subscribers. And for those that subscribe to the AJC, we certainly appreciate the support that you provide to allow the AJC's journalists to continue doing the great work they do, covering the entire city, bringing you Atlanta news now. And if you're not a subscriber, this is a great time for you to become one. Simply go to this website. It's ajc.com/subscribe. That's ajc.com/subscribe. I'll also tell you this, that the AJC Community Conversation you're enjoying tonight have very similar events coming up very soon. How about 5 p.m. on Tuesday, September 29th? As we head towards election season, some of the AJC's journalists getting together to evaluate the current political landscape, including some of the latest poll results. Check that out. Another edition of the AJC Community Conversation, this time covering the world of politics. It's Tuesday, September 29th. Check that out at 5 p.m. on the AJC video channels. All right, as I said before, want to get into the idea of fans in the stands. How many? How safe is it? Todd Stansberry, I want to start with you if you don't mind, because Terry Lee Thompson, one of our viewers watching, had a question. He said, how do teams such as Georgia Tech, how do you decide how many fans you let in? And this may be the $64,000 question. Which of your season ticket holders, which of your fans got the nod to actually have tickets and be inside? How tough of a decision-making process was that for the Yellow Jackets?
Well, it was really, actually what we ended up doing is looking at direction from the CDC and public health officials here locally. And then we overlaid their guidance in Bobby Dodd Stadium. And we actually worked with, in true Georgia Tech fashion, with a Georgia Tech related software company that came up with a program where we could input the kind of the social distancing guidelines and all of that, overlay it into Bobby Dodd, and come up with how we could actually create a seating manifest to do that, and at the end of it, figure out how many seats we could actually, how many fans we could actually accommodate, and that this is one of those where all those gift points come in handy, because you start at your number one donor and you go through the list until you have no seats left. But that's kind of the process that we went through.
And Greg at UGA, I know you guys kind of went through a similar process, but a viewer that lives in Chattanooga that enjoys tailgating in the RV lot submitted a question before our broadcast began, said, what about the tailgating part of this? I know you guys have, at least in terms of traditional tailgating, that's not going to be going on in Athens this year. What was that decision-making process like? And I guess what was it like to announce to fans that for those of you that really enjoy the tailgating experience, you may not get as much of that in Athens this year as you're used to?
Well, Brandon, it's almost like old-fashioned tailgating. We just felt like if our fans had driven 3 or 4 hours, they're able to assemble by their car. In other words, to get in any lot on campus, not only in our lots, you had to have a parking pass and a game ticket. But in the lots that we don't control, you still have to have a game ticket to get in. So really, there won't be much loitering around during the game. But we just felt like instead of people sitting in their car waiting to enter the stadium, our lots open 3 hours prior to kickoff. So there's not a lot of time to set up a true tailgate. But, you know, there'll be no tables, no tailgating as we knew it last year. But certainly it gives people a chance to get out and relax a little bit. They're probably going to be sitting with the people that they travel with in their car. So we'll try it and see how it goes. And I think everybody will be glad to be able to experience at least some level of tailgating.
Rich, this is a little bit different kind of fan topic, but we mentioned a moment ago, folks did turn to running in big numbers when the quarantines first began. And yet, in your position leading the Atlanta Track Club, I'm imagining there's also a little bit of pressure to make sure you're educating people on what the safe way to run is. There were huge questions at the beginning of all of this. Is it okay to be on the belt line? You know, things along those lines. What's it been like, you know, trying to make sure that, first of all, you're up to date on the latest information about being outdoors and running, and also disseminating that information to runners here in the Atlanta area who need to know those facts?
That's a great question. Much like everybody else on this call, our business is driven by bringing people together. And when we were unable to bring people together, we were challenged in how we could communicate. But we did recognize, as I mentioned, so many more people running and walking. So we brought the advice to them. We created a microsite called The Distance. And on that distance, we created and continue to today workouts, video workouts, music playlists, injury advice, diet suggestions, so that people will come out of this pandemic healthier than when they went into it. So we've been really lucky that our community, the community that we call Running City USA here in Atlanta, has gravitated toward this microsite to learn how to deal with the pandemic while they're running and walking.
Nikki, the other day, the New England Patriots coach Bill Belichick was asked if anything in his past had prepared him for coaching a game without fans, and he kind of deadpan jokingly said practice. You know, you did coach in a game without fans. Did it feel like a practice to you, or did you get over the, I guess, lack of noise after a while?
I think you think about it until the ball's tipped up. I think just that feeling of being used to seeing fans flow into an arena and the energy that you get before a game. I don't think you have that. I challenged our players all season that they were going to have to lift each other, motivate each other, and do those things. But I think because every team was in the same situation, you just got used to it. And when you play every other day, it becomes the new normal pretty quickly. So I think once the ball was tipped up, you just found that you were coaching your team, that everyone was going to hear you. The official was going to hear every word you said, and the team and the opposite team. And it just was one of those venues where I thought the league did an incredible job of building out Feld Entertainment Center and making it look good, and work well for us. But there were definitely problems at times with noise, and it was amazing in a space where there were no fans, that when I needed a timeout and was screaming timeout, sometimes that my voice would just disappear, because it wasn't your traditional arena set up for noise. So, for the most part, I don't think it affected outcomes. I think the toughest part for us, and I know the NBA dealt with this too, is West Coast games and trying to have them on weekdays. It's a 10 o'clock tip is hard for everyone because you're not getting back to the hotel until 2 a.m. and you just feel like you're hungover the next day without drinking any alcohol. So I think that was the toughest part for us. That would have probably been easier in Vegas, because I think it would have been easier to play East Coast games early than it was to play West Coast games late.
Katie, we've been allowing viewers to pre-submit questions for a number of days, and a viewer in Smyrna who's a big Atlanta United fan the other day had asked, how about fans in Mercedes-Benz Stadium? Over the course of the last few days, there actually has been some announcements on that. I understand we may get a chance to see some United games with some fans there at Mercedes-Benz Stadium coming up maybe in the month of October. Can you tell us a little bit more about, on both the Falcons and United side, about what Mercedes-Benz Stadium may look like within the next month or so?
Certainly. So we are very, very excited to be able to welcome back a limited number of fans, starting with our home match on October 24th. So for us, it really, the whole time having been participating in these leadership meetings, it really has always been, just as Todd referenced, about following CDC guidance, following the trends, not just nationally, but more specifically locally. What's happening here in Georgia? How can we ensure that whatever we're doing is safe, again, for our athletes, for our fans, and for our associates? And if we weren't comfortable we'd be able to do that, we weren't going to do it. So that's why we've been playing without fans. That being said, I think we've had perhaps a slightly different reaction to the lack of fans that Nikki referenced. It's something where, we've been incredibly fortunate to have the best fans in Major League Soccer, averaging more than 50,000, and our teams missed it. I was at our match last night. It is a very, very different feeling, even with some audio in the venue. We miss our fans. We're very, very much looking forward to getting them back with us, and are excited that we've now worked on a process where we are confident we can do so safely. So I think when you look at it, there are really two different sort of lenses through which you need to look at it. First of which is, what are we doing on the stadium side to ensure sanitation, health checks, things along those lines, both in terms of ensuring our associates who are working are healthy, as well as ensuring that those individuals who are coming through the game, you have to be committing that you don't have a fever, you don't have any symptoms, all of those things, as well as making sure that anyone that we're bringing in, exactly as Todd referenced, we went through the whole process of ensuring, okay, what are those social distancing guidelines, working in accordance with the CDC, building out a manifest that allows that, but plus up, both of our leagues have different guidelines in terms of setback from the field and things along those lines to ensure the health and safety of our players. And then there's also things along the lines of masks and ensuring that people are actually wearing them. I think one of the things we've learned from talking to some of the other clubs across MLS who have welcomed fans back already is specificity matters, in terms of, it's not just wear a mask unless you're eating or drinking. Holding a beer does not count as drinking. So really little things along those lines, and educating, ensuring that there's accountability, but also ensuring that we're going to be very well staffed and we're going to be taking that seriously. And so it's all about messaging and communication. Our fans, I think, are probably going to get inundated over the coming weeks in terms of exactly what will it mean to be in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, either for an Atlanta United game or a Falcons game. And we are going to be working with them, obviously, in a collaborative manner. We realize this is for a lot of people, but ultimately, if you're coming to our venue and you are not interested or able in abiding by these protocols aimed at not only protecting you, but protecting everyone else, we are going to have to address that. So that's the mentality we're taking into this.
Gila, we got a 20-plus year season ticket holder for the Falcons living in Valdosta wanting to know, for this team that did play in front of some fans in Dallas this past week, Seattle obviously prior to that not, what do you think the experience has been for the Falcons in kind of the fanless environment going back to week one? I know they'll be happy to have fans coming back to Mercedes-Benz Stadium as well. See, there we go.
Yes, they're very excited about that, Brandon. They're going to do a test run this Sunday for the Bears game with 500 friends and family. They felt they were at a disadvantage in Dallas with them playing before 21,708 fans. And, having to play at home in the previous game with no fans. So the coaches, made a big fuss about the disparity of who was getting in and who was not getting in. And so, the teams that, let fans in, I think they tried to learn from those environments and then to move forward in other venues. And certainly the Falcons are trying to move forward with fans in October. I think the Carolina game will be the first time they'll have home fans. So, the players that we talked to and the coaches, Coach Dan Quinn, they're excited about the fans coming in and maybe helping them, create an environment as best they can to give them some sort of home field advantage.
Bob Zamblin watching on YouTube's got a great question. I want to get an answer for that from all of our panelists here coming up in a moment. Steve, before that, as a consumer yourself of the NBA playoffs right now, watching what's going on, the games themselves have obviously been quite entertaining. Have you gotten used to the non-traditional environment and the absence of fans there in Orlando?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't a big stretch. I was actually on the committee who built a lot of the virtual signage and the virtual fans and did that. But one of the things you have to understand, at the end of the day, everybody on this screen is responsible for building an experience for their fans. Letting them into the building isn't enough. And there's rituals. I love going to Athens for a game. It is, a ritual from the trumpet being played to the fourth quarter to every element of those things. And the same thing with a Hawks game. We've been fortunate to be voted the top experience in the NBA the last 2 years. We can't forget the experience, both for the players and the fans. So while safety is paramount, and I think everybody did a great job, now you've got to go take safety, make sure you nail that. We also have to create an experience that makes people want to get off their couch and spend their money and come see and support their team. And that's incredibly complex right now.
We're coming towards the end of our hour here. I want to be respectful of all of our panelists' time, and yet I do want to try to squeeze in one more topic before we're done. It comes via Bob Zamblin watching on YouTube, so we'll allow all of you to give a brief answer to this, but he's looking forward to what sports is going to look like in the future. So let's fast forward here to the next 12 months or so. Steve, I know you mentioned a little earlier in the NBA's case that you're not quite sure yet what the 2020-21 season is going to look like, but I think you mentioned the possibility of a January start. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you know about that right now?
Well, I think it'll be after the first of the year start. I'm certainly not saying it's a January start. It could start as late as March. I mean, time has to be our friend, and learning from what's going on now with the NFL, with college football, is very, very important. But I do think sports will be changed. I do think that venues need to create spaces more than seats. I think that, the idea of socially connecting can be done in different ways. And I do think that everything from food and beverage, I think all of us here are with Coca-Cola Company. And there was a big move at Mercedes-Benz a couple of years ago for the fans to serve themselves. Now we all have to scramble, and reverse engineer a lot of the things that we've done for the times. So I don't think we know with precision. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, that's fine. You mentioned an interesting phrase there, the idea of spaces more so than seats. Is that the kind of thing that you think maybe a younger audience might gravitate more, whereas, maybe folks who may be a little older, maybe used to sitting in the traditional seat? Is that an outreach for younger people, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's the way we designed our building. We took our arena down from 19,400 seats to 17,000, and we created hangout spaces, socialization to dimensionalize the experience. So the idea of sitting in your seat, having a beer and a hot dog and paying attention for 3 hours doesn't exist in today's world. And it's how do you entertain? How do you connect? How do you make the night an experience?
Rich, are we back to normal for the AJC Peachtree Road Race in 2021?
I hope so. I got my fingers and my toes crossed. To Steve's point, experience. That resonates with me, and it resonates with everybody who participates on the 4th of July. So if COVID allows, I will make sure that the 52nd running of the Peachtree will be the most special running in the history of the event.
Katie, how about for MLS? One of the things that makes your league a little bit different, you do have 3 Canadian teams. International travel's made difficult with what all we're dealing with. How about the next 12 months for Atlanta United and the MLS?
I mean, I truly wish I had a crystal ball. Unfortunately, I don't. As you're looking at those international regulations, you're exactly right. I mean, as you saw in Major League Baseball, the Toronto Blue Jays had to find an alternate venue. You're seeing something similar in the world of Major League Soccer to get us through the remainder of this season. I think everyone is keeping an eye on it. Steve nailed it. I think as time is our friend, we're learning more. We are very hopeful that the world will evolve in a way in which we can have matches with fans next year, or Rich can have the Peachtree Road Race back at full-fledged. It's something where that's what we're all tracking to, but we're making a lot of contingency plans because we realize if we have learned nothing else during the last several months, there's a lot that we don't know. And as soon as we assume that we do know something, it'll probably change.
Right. Nikki, how about for the players in the WNBA? One of the things that people may or may not be aware of is a lot of the players who play in WNBA also play internationally overseas. They play a second season many times. And that right now, that opportunity may not exist because of the travel restrictions that I mentioned a moment ago. For the players who count on that money, are they expecting to be able to do that again very soon?
Yeah, we've got players. I've got a player that's already gone over to Russia. A lot that will be en route in the next 10 days to Turkey and Spain. And so I think the biggest change internationally is those countries are allowing those athletes in with quarantine rules and things in place. But the money just isn't very good. So at a time when you've heard a lot from with our new CBA in terms of these players making so much more money overseas, I think for the first time, there's a lot of players that are making more money in the WNBA this past summer than they will make overseas because of sponsorship deals and things cut down. So a lot of things still in play over there in terms of travel within countries versus inter-country travel. So EuroLeague games have been moved to pods and different things like that. So there definitely are contingency plans, and they are testing, but not to the level that they certainly were when we were in the bubble. And so I think just, we're going to have to wait and see whether there's upticks in cases in certain countries. For me, it affects us because, quite frankly, with a lottery pick in the draft, probably 2 of the top 5 players happen to be 19-year-old that'll turn 20 this next year, Europeans that are playing in Italy and France. And right now, I cannot go travel and watch them play. They don't want Americans in those countries right now. So until those regulations change, I won't be able to go scout players that could be a huge part of the Dream's future.
Greg, how about not 12 months ahead, but just the next couple of months, basketball returning after not getting a chance to finish its season, spring sports returning with a lot of those folks very hungry to play games again after missing out on that. When you look at the rest of the athletic year for your institution, what's it going to be like returning to those sports? For basketball in particular, I've heard a lot of wild ideas being bandied about what might go on.
Well, we're working through scheduling right now. We know we can start November 25th. But really, we're working on that now. But, baseball, softball, gymnastics, you may just see intra-conference play only. I know we're not set on that, but it's going to look different in our venues. Certainly in Stegman Coliseum, you're only able to have 1,700 people in that facility. So, it's really going to look different from that standpoint. And so we're still working through all the details. We just, frankly, want to get to Saturday and start the season, and then we'll all feel a little bit better. But certainly it'll be different for student athletes and fans as well.
Todd, how about you from the perspective of Georgia Tech with the athletic seasons that are still to come? I know you've got a lot of athletes chomping at the bit to be back on courts and fields again. What's that like for you guys on the flats right now?
Well, I think the uniqueness of intercollegiate athletics is that we've got multiple sports, and know what? And not all of them are going to be affected the same way. You've got some that, because of just the numbers, are going to be much more challenging even than football is. And a lot of these decisions are going to be made in real time. There's no roadmap. And so we're just going to have to wait and see. We're going to make the best decisions we can. But it's hard to plan not knowing kind of what we're going to be up against until we actually get there.
Well, as a way of wrapping up our conversation this evening, we've been taking comments all night long on both our Facebook and YouTube page. And we got a message a moment ago from Richard Malik. And I think this is a really a beautiful sentiment and a great way to close out our discussion tonight. He says, when this pandemic began, I never thought I'd be saying this, but if you truly and honestly look at it, sports have actively led the way in trying to normalize life and create an economic way forward. He goes on to say, hats off to our local leaders. And I'll certainly echo that as a big consumer of sports here in our state, for all of you who have worked so hard to allow events to take place and keep the players that play those sports and the coaches themselves healthy and safe. Certainly on behalf of everyone in our state, I say thank you to all of you for that. And also thank you tonight for being here as a part of our AJC Community Conversation. And for the folks who've been watching tonight on Facebook and YouTube, a huge thanks to you as well. A reminder also that you can continue to get great insight on how coronavirus is impacting our state and our city here in Atlanta, not just in the world of sports, but in every walk of our life, by staying close to the AJC, either keeping up with the news at ajc.com, but also a great chance to become an AJC subscriber as well at subscribe.ajc.com. That website, once again, subscribe.ajc.com. It's a great way to support the work that's being done by the journalists of the AJC, keeping everyone informed about how the coronavirus is impacting all of our lives and all the other important topics there as well. And a big thank you to our friends at Kroger. As I said before, for my family, Kroger's been an invaluable resource, keeping food on our table back at a time in which we thought more about that than we ever have before, but also just kind of establishing a sense of normalcy there as well. They work hard. Their workers have been tireless throughout this entire process. So a big thanks to our friends at Kroger there as well. And don't forget, another AJC Community Conversation is coming your way again very soon as well. But for tonight, thank you for being with our panelists of sports leaders across the state, taking a look at coronavirus and the world of sports. We will look forward to speaking to you again very soon.